Hi everyone, Vanessa here, alcoholic, sobriety dates October 8th, 2017. And today I want to talk about fasting. Some of you may have been here since the van set free days. That was when I had a blog that was particularly uh, about my conversion, I guess, me coming to Jesus in a sense, because I found it very shocking. In 2012 is really when I had an experience. With actually just watching services from the Rock Church. And this is when I still lived in the Riverside Inland Empire area. And I was in the midst of I'm sorry, it was probably 2013. It was in the middle of my alcoholism. I was living alone in a studio apartment downtown Riverside. I was in a pretty toxic relationship and the beginnings of one. And I felt really like lost. I was an incredibly toxic person myself at the time. And I had like a really like there was a loss of meaning. Like I had no real direction. And surprisingly enough, that toxic boyfriend actually introduced me to this church, and I really enjoyed the message that was being preached. And it was one that, to my innermost self, I had felt was the most accurate, which is this one of a loving God. And it changed my life. And I remember being particularly hungover, and my dear sweet little Coppola was in the bed with me, and he would nurse me to health every time I had a hangover, which was a lot during that time, which is why I had such an emotional and deep and spiritual connection to Coppola, my dog, my Chihuahua. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but who passed away in 2022, by the way. And so I you had this experience, and that literally, like, I remember just being on this bed. It was like a Murphy bed too, by the way. I still have a Murphy bed too. And I just remember being so sick on that bed and then hearing something. And I really wish I could remember like what series I was listening to or what exactly it was. But it just like brought me to my knees. Like I just like slipped out of bed and brought myself to my knees on that like very old, probably original wood floors, and just weeping. I was just like crying. I was just overcome with this feeling of defeat and just like thinking that I had reached the end of myself and that now I was truly ready to give everything over to Jesus. And I experienced a really beautiful transformation during that time, something that really caught me off guard and that I hadn't really experienced before, and especially not in terms of Christianity. Like, I was the last person I ever thought would ever turn to Christianity. Okay, and this was in 2013. This was over 10 years ago. And I just remember thinking, like, how is this happening? Am I really becoming this person? I was reading the Bible, like I was going, it was so bizarre, like to actually have this experience, even though I had been dabbling about it. It is really interesting because I've had multiple boyfriends who have been pretty like involved in the church. And I think that if even if the relationships never worked out, I think it was just another way that God was trying to get to me, was through these men. But so I had that experience and I thought it was so strange. Then I created the Vans Set Free blog in which I was documenting and like, how is this happening? Like, it was just a very strange experience to think that I was going to be Christian and that I was so devoted to this too. And then I ended up getting involved with the church, and then I ended up actually moving. I ended up moving it was part of the reason that I came down to San Diego to begin with, was to get closer to this church. And then I got involved in it and was in part of the ministries and stuff like that. But during that first time, the church was doing a fast. You know, a lot of churches do this, they'll do a fast. And they had talked about the Daniel fast. And so I'd gotten the book, I started reading it, I was fasting. And to me, honestly, didn't really know what to expect from that experience. Again, I was just still like a baby Christian. I didn't really understand what I was even supposed to get from that. I just know that it was a good spiritual practice to engage in. And I was like, what have I got to lose? And the whole church is doing it. This should be fun. And what I ended up having was definitely an experience. I ended up having and I don't really talk about this very often. One, because the Bible is pretty clear that if you're like praying or if you're in fasting, you're not really supposed to be super like ostentatious and obvious and like, look at me, I'm such a good person, I'm fasting, I'm such a good person, I'm in prayer. And when I talk about these things, I hope that you hear them as just me sharing my experience with these things as a tool for spiritual growth in case you've ever considered it or even open to the idea, because that's the only way I would have ever heard of these practices and the way that they've transformed my life. So then the immediate most shallow response that I had to this fasting experience was that I lost weight. And I lost weight and it was like, oh wow, like this is cool. And I had so much energy, I just had so much energy. And I was able to think so clearly. I can't even like, my thoughts were so clear, which if you know me at all, even if you watch these videos, my thoughts are usually very jumbled and very just like I have a lot of them at the same time and they're kind of muddied up against each other. And I often have times where I have a difficult time just even finishing the sentence before I want to go on to the next idea. And um, I found myself just being like, super clear-headed and I was needing less and less sleep and I was not craving the sugar or the caffeine. And I even had stopped drinking alcohol during that time. And I just had a just like almost like a sharpening up of my human experience, right? And I was like, whoa, I'm going to keep doing this. I think we were just doing it for 21 days. I ended up doing it for maybe, I think I tried going to 40 days, but ended like around 30 or something. And uh, it was just a wonderful experience. And I had a lot of clarity and a lot of answers were prayers were answered at that time. And it was just a very light, like I was like, oh, there really is something there, really is what I felt. Then I did it again, and I had the experience of similar again. I had such peacefulness, I had such joy. It was like I could do all the things. I had like this incredible amount, this endless amount of energy and clarity as I was going through my day. But what I began to notice is that I was also having it was kind of spurring these moments of hypomania in me. And this was before I really began to take my mental health seriously, but I would just like lay in bed and not sleep. Like I could just, and I spent most of my day, or most of my night, just not really concerned about anything, but just kind of contemplating God and Jesus and what does it mean? And it sounds like it could have easily been and turned into like a psychotic episode, except it wasn't. I was just like very even keeled. I just needed less sleep. And I would, and I still had like the energy. I also didn't at that time have and the way that I would differentiate this experience from an actual hypomanic episode is the feelings of like euphoria that and almost like in my hypomania or even manic episodes that I've had, I would be like, oh, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna start this idea. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do blah, 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 blah. And I would have like all these ideas and like just start all these projects. And then by the time the manic episode was done, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I just started like 12 new things. And none of these things I actually care about. Um, and so then I did that. And I did the fast for about, I want to say 3 or 4 years in a row. And then I would just start and stop. And then I never really completed the full 21 days after that. And again, it was interesting because the one thing that people remarked on the most was like my weight. And they're like, oh, you lost weight. And it's like, okay, that's cool. And I wasn't telling people really that I was fasting because, again, you're not really supposed to be like out there going, I'm fasting. Or like, and you're really not supposed to make it like an inconvenience for other people. And like, you're not supposed to make it a thing. Like, this is just a thing between you and God. And so I tried to be besides my blog where I really talked about it there. I didn't really just like advertise that I was fasting. Um, and then, and I had joined like an online community too, and that was really cool. But something that kind of bothered me about the online community, even at that time. So, what I left out of that, and I started the sentence and then I didn't finish it, was the thing that I didn't like about the online community is how obsessed everybody was with what we weren't able to have. So, that means that people became more obsessed and focused on the lack of sugar and fatty foods and carbs and all this stuff. They made it very much focused on what they weren't having versus the connection that they were supposed to be having. And it was kind of a little judgmental of me for sure, but I do feel like it's very easy when you're going through spiritual practices like this, especially if it's like really novel, and like to get caught up in the technicalities of it. Like there was a lot of back and forth of like, well, can you have tea? That's why I kind of stumbled about whether you can have tea or not. Or can you add ice to your water? I mean, some of the conversations in there, I understand they came from a place of like wanting to grow and do it right. But it's also like, where is your heart in that? And where is God in that type of thing? So I feel like I was looking at the online communities like super judgy and not very spiritually inclined, when I also was just sitting there not being super spiritually inclined because I was sitting there judging them. So that was all I wanted to say about that. Time when, mind you, I'm stopping these fasts and then just going right back into drinking and being toxic, because I wasn't able to fully experience these beautiful moments of clarity and peace and joy and then integrate them into my day-to-day life. They absolutely did have some kind of an impact on me, but it was like sunk down below to my psyche because it seems too inconvenienced to me to really incorporate and to try to live out. Like it was asking a lot to ask me to actually change the way that I talked to people. Even though I did, I think some people started noticing that I was a little more peaceful. I stopped engaging with my family in certain ways. Um, some relationships did improve, but overall, I was just like, I didn't, I was still consumed with like men and money and getting up ahead in the world and like was I going to step on next so it was just very, I mean, the queen of the double life over here, right? And then I and that book, The Daniel Fast, was incredible. I've bought that book at least, and this is not an exaggeration, at least 5 times since 2012. And so like every couple of years I'm buying it. I just happen to lose the book, or it gets ruined, or I don't know. I'm always having to rebuy that book. And so I purchased it recently because I'm noticing like, and this is also problematic because for anybody with eating disorders or disordered eating, like fasting can be a huge, huge trigger because now you're just masking the disorder, body dysmorphia, and all of that under the spiritual, um, guise of getting closer to God, when really you're just kind of hiding, restricting, and punishing your body, which is not what fasting necessarily is. And especially as I struggled over the years, I kind of, especially when I started feeling like bad about myself, I'd be like, well, I'm just going to start fasting. And it's like, oh, that's not really doing this practice with the purest of intentions. And so the results, I mean, God will show up in any circumstance, but it wasn't going to hit, it wasn't going to resonate in the same way. And I did still have some experiences even when I did approach fasting from that way. Um, and I'm saying all of that because I'm considering fasting again here soon. And I am saying this mostly as a reminder to myself, but also because there has been something very interesting about incorporating more like physical. I guess I've always kind of just, I wrote about this a lot on my blog about embodiment and being in my body. I've had a hard time with that since sobriety, and well, before sobriety, for most of my life, basically. I have a hard time being in my body and really understanding like what I'm feeling. So, and it can be really annoying. So, for example, when I would be drunk all the time, I was physically dissociated from the physical sensations of my body. So if something was triggering it because it was unsafe or because somebody harmed me or because I was enraged or because I was sad. Like the alcohol created this barrier between my thoughts and my spirit and my body. And it came in between and was kind of like the salve. It was kind of like this thing that kept me cushioned between the reality because if I ever sat down with the feelings of my body, it could almost feel like it would be unbearable, that sadness. I don't know if you've ever experienced a deep heartbreak, just that deep, deep feeling of just like almost physical pain because your body is so sad. And it's like those were the feelings I really stayed away from. Also, the feeling of emptiness that comes with depression and just being so disengaged and apart from life. It was really hard for me to feel that. And also the anger, because the anger always got me into trouble. And the anger is ultimately something that I really tried to fend off and like keep myself away from, whether it was justified or not. Um, because I do feel like sometimes there is anger that's not justified, and it comes from the experience of not adequately standing up for myself, and some like maybe that's more self-betrayal. And sometimes there is anger that can be justified in the injustices in the world or the perceived injustices against us, and ourselves. Like I identify with all of that, but to me, when I lost my temper, it was all bets are off. You better run for cover. Shit's going down. And so I learned that that wasn't socially acceptable behavior for me to have, and therefore I tried to stuff it and keep myself away from my anger and rage as much as possible. And over the last couple years, really since I started grieving and all the losses from 2021 to 2022, um, and I experienced that real dissociation from self again. Like I didn't know what I was doing. Like I would go to, and like in 2022, I was going to a lot of comedy shows, and I was just every night going to like at least one, sometimes three open mics or comedy shows. And uh it was just like I did that as a way, as a means of escaping myself. Like during the day, I would work as much as possible. I would sponsor women, and then I would go to these comedy shows because instead of drinking to dissociate myself, I was being entertained as a way to dissociate myself. And also the act of, getting dressed, going out, driving, finding all of these things. It was just another means of like addiction, really, and another way of just getting separated from self. And when I learned that I was doing that and I was really just running myself ragged, and not to mention that now I had infused myself into this community that I didn't really want to be a part of. I had not intended on being a part of in the way that I was like, oh my gosh, and like trying to extract myself from that was a whole other fiasco. But I had to do that. And in doing that, I had to learn to sit with self again. And sitting with self meant, oh, I can feel this grief. I can feel this sadness. I could feel this confusion. I can feel this lack of faith in the 12 steps, in God, in my faith, in life, and that things work out. I can express my confusion, my frustration, and I can sit with those feelings and be okay. And, um, it it part of that was integrating my meditation practices again, my two-way prayer. Part of that was getting back into meetings, sponsoring women again, and just doing more activities like physical activities and being able to like go on walks and hikes again. Like that was stuff that I wasn't doing for a while. But something that I've still struggled with is around the food thing because I can still self-medicate quite significantly with like sugars or fats. Um, Caffeine, not so much anymore, but I know that that was a big thing for me for a while. But it's just like the reaching of these things for to feel better in my own skin, right? And I feel like fasting is a good way to clear that stuff out. And all of this was to say that for a few months now, I love steak. Like Vanessa loves the steak, okay? But there's been something lately that when I just cannot, ugh, like the idea, I've never felt good cooking meat. Like there's something about meat that is just, and I don't think it's bad. I love it. It's delicious. I just, the actual act of it and knowing what I am doing, and I feel like there's ethical ways to do it, but it's just like, there's something about that that doesn't sit right with me. And so I'm saying all of this to say that I'm considering going back to a vegetarian diet, which is something that I did for a really long time. And it wasn't because I think there's just something that doesn't gel well with me, even though I'm not having any actual physical that I'm aware of issues or like side effects from eating meat. It's just like consciously, it just feels like a bad thing to eat. Like we're not supposed to be eating it for some reason. Um, Even though we are, our ancestors ate it, like all of this stuff. Like, I don't know. So I feel like the transition for me has lately been like, I think I'm going to start removing meat. I'm going to finish the meat that I have. I might still stick to some fish. I need to think about that. Uh, I need to pray on that. I need to see how that sits with me. And when I'm done with the meat that I've already gotten purchased, I got one of those butcher boxes, by the way, and I think maybe that's why just having so much meat from different dead animals in my freezer, it's just like this is too much. Like this is, I don't know. Uh, and so I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go back to being vegetarian. But then like some of the dairy products really started getting to me, and I love a brie cheese. Like I love brie. Um, I don't really drink milk a ton. I really do like almond milk, even though I don't think it's very healthy at all. And it's not anything about health. It's just trying to avoid, I'll eat yogurt. Yogurt is okay. But there's something about that that just feels like it's just, he sounds crazy saying these things, I know, but just like energetically isn't fitting with me anymore. And so I feel like I'm probably going to transition out of that. And then I was like, oh, well, all I'm doing is a Daniel fast then. If that's really what I'm trying to accomplish here, it would be me going back to a Daniel fast because a Daniel fast was a partial fasting where you're removing all meats, oils, sugars, caffeines, breads. Um, Anything that didn't come from a seed, basically. So you would just be eating, fruits, vegetables. Um, I don't even think you can drink tea, just water. And I mean, that's all that you are really sustained by, that and prayer, essentially. And I don't know. So I was like, oh, am I just doing that again? Because I can eat veggies all day long. Like that's not a problem. I can do that. Uh, So I'm considering doing that, and I would love to hear. I don't feel like doing a full fast for me is the best thing because there is something about that feeling of emptiness that I can become addicted to, and that makes me feel uh, it's disordered eating, basically. I mean, it's like, oh, if I can go one day without eating, surely I can go 2 days, and then by the end of the week, I'll have dropped 5 pounds. And look at how powerful I am, and look at what a great self-will I have, which is not what this is about. I don't want to go that direction. I'm trying to go the direction of growing and relying and depending upon God for any of the cravings that I could get to have a sugar-free drink, for example. Like I'm looking at this thing, which, by the way, maybe it was just the one that I went to, but this apple crisp macchiato, horrible, horrible tasting. I had to keep drinking and mixing it, and I'm really hoping that it just I was gonna say that the flavor goes away. I can't even explain what it tastes like, but it was $5, so I'm gonna drink it. Um, okay, so all of that to say that I'm going to try this Daniel fast again, and I'm gonna sit and pray about it a little bit more. Um, and it's just one more tool, one more tool to feel clear to get some more clarity, to feel more aligned. Um, that's another thing, like this alignment. And I don't know where it's going to take me, but I wanted to share that with you. I might start next week. It does take a little bit of preparation, like I need to go shopping and stuff like that just for veggies and making sure that I'm setting myself up for success here. And I think that's all I got. I would love to hear if any of you have had an experience with fasting, what your spiritual experience was like. I would love to hear just how you guys are doing this beautiful Sunday morning, unless you're on the East Coast and I think that there's a hurricane or something, and I'm sorry. And I hope that you're safe. Okay, love you guys. Bye.